So this evening we're going to hear from Nick, and he's going to talk to us under the title of The Ness of Brodgar to a T. I wonder what that could mean.
I wonder.
Let's hear from the man himself. Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you, Martin. I think that there's still some folk who think that we just turn up at the beginning of the dig each year and it's all set up and ready to go and we just kind of jump in the trenches and start digging away. But really the Ness takes up the whole year, and we don't just sit around twiddling our thumbs or polishing our trowels for the other 8 months, 10 months of the year. It is an ongoing process of fundraising, but also post-excavation. And the last year has been no exception to that at all. There's been a whole range of activities, grant applications, dealing with about 20-odd specialists who are involved in the post-excavation of the Ness, ranging from people looking at the stone tools, the animal bone, the human bone, etc., etc., etc. But one of the things, almost the prime objectives of the last 8 months or so, has been the creation of a GIS system for the Ness. And this is necessary because we are dealing with tens of thousands of pieces of information. We've probably excavated, well, we have over 30,000 finds catalogued, but there's many, many more. And when you take into account the tens of thousands of photographs, the numerous plans, etc. So we're lucky enough in Orca to have a chap called Crane Begg. And Crane has helped us produce this GIS system. And this is just a few screen grabs of what the GIS can do. This is the outline of all our main trenches, and you can see they're blacked in. Well, they're not blacked in deliberately, they're blacked in because those represent the number of finds. So literally every single square inch of the excavation trenches, items have been found. But if you zoom in a bit, you can see that in fact you start to see the outline of the buildings, where the walls have been, where you expect to find less in the way of finds. And by utilising the GIS, we can three-dimensionally locate every single item that's been ever discovered in the Ness. And this allows you to plot out distribution plots, see how perhaps different elements of the cultural assemblage have been found within the buildings. So you'll see, for instance, you can select pottery, decorated pottery, etc., etc., etc. The limitations just don't exist. And you manage to link that into every other aspect of the kind of material. So, for instance, you can link it into some of the photographs that have been taken of the finds. So when it comes to the specialists looking at the material, they can bring up this GIS system, they can look at other material that might give inklings about what particular areas of structures and middens, etc. have been used for. But it's a wonderful resource. So watch this space, because as more and more material is put into this GIS system, then it'll become more and more useful to us. And I think that it will start to illuminate huge amounts of this massive, monumental assemblage that we have of the Ness. But all of this that we do in post-excavation wouldn't really be feasible without the help of volunteers. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank just some of the people who help us throughout the year. Volunteers who come in week after week, catalogue things, create lists, rebox things, check numbers, all these kind of basic tasks, but very, very important tasks. Without their help, here's just a list of some of them: Annabelle, Christine, Rosemary, Neil. I wish I could clone you all. You're all wonderful. Huge thank you, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of the whole of the Ness team. Yes, please. I see some of you clapping yourselves, and you deserve it. So anyway, thank you one and all. So a quick resume, or not resume, but a quick look at what we'll be doing this year. Every year we have these plans, we have our kind of research strategy. What are we going to do at the Ness? And every year, despite our best laid plans of mice and men, things always change, because the Ness changes, sometimes on an hourly, a daily basis. But our plans this year are 1 to have a look at our main trench, Trench P, where we have the major structures that so far been uncovered. And within this little trench, we'll be looking at Structure 1, the structure that started it all back in 2003. And there, we see Structure 1 in its original form. And up until this point in time, we've been gradually removing all the later phases of this building. And that included this later curved wall that was placed across this building, much reducing its internal size. So last year, we've now removed everything that relates to later phases, and we've actually removed that wall too. So we now look at the floor deposits of the original building, when it was first constructed, phase 1 of this structure, when it had 2 massive hearths. So the interior of this building will now again be gridded out. We'll be taking hundreds, thousands of samples, looking at a whole range of different types of material, and gradually there'll be Anne Dubois, who'll be in charge of this little structure. We will hopefully unpick it. And then by putting together all that information, putting it all into the GIS, we'll hopefully get a better idea about how the different areas of this structure were utilised. The same with Structure 8. Structure 8, the kind of slightly bigger sister to Structure 1. There we see it in outline, this time with 6 hearths. Slightly less complex history to this particular building. Structure 8, slightly bigger, slightly less complex in its history. So here we're still kind of gridding out and dealing with the still very complex floor deposits of the structure. Structure 12, this very grandiose building, where again we've now looked at the later phases when it was roughly in plan like this, 2 big square hearths, a single entrance at its northern end, and now we'll be looking at the primary phase of it. So we're gradually working back through time. And then grand old Structure 10, the so-called Neolithic Cathedral. There, likewise, we've now removed all the secondary use of it, the secondary remodelling, where it had corner buttresses placed. So we're now back to the original square, kind of with rounded corners, the original build of it. And again, all of this floor has been gridded, lots of samples taken, and gradually the story of it is being refined. And this includes taking lots of samples for radiocarbon dates. We've had quite a few, and that is really giving us an idea about the kind of toing and froing of Neolithic society, the ebbing and flowing of it. Because as I'm sure many of you have heard me say before, Neolithic society was a dynamic, changing society, and that has been reflected in the changes that we see in the buildings at the Ness. And then last year, Structure 26 turned up. We had one side of it here, just at the edge of our trench, so we just extended just a little bit to get its full outline. A lot smaller than the other buildings. In fact, we think of this as probably one of the very, very late buildings on site, maybe even post-dating Structure 10, but the relationship just isn't clear. So, and it's still filled with all the kind of collapse and rubble within it. So, a matter again unpicking that, but it looks as though we're dealing with almost a kind of flattened D-shaped structure. And then just beside it, Structure 13, which, judging by the curvature here of its outside wall, you're looking at something massive, more akin to all those other massive big piered structures, ones like 8 and 12. But last year we also reopened Trench J. This had lain dormant really since 2008, but there were certain questions that had been thrown up in post-excavation. So this was the kind of oval structure it has radial piers rather than the kind of stone-built, dry stone-built piers. And as shown last year, this is definitely an early Neolithic structure, much like the Nap of Hower on Papa Westray. And the interesting thing about this, though, is that last year we clarified the relationship between Structure 5 and the so-called Great Wall, and they seem to be contemporary. which came as a real surprise to us because I had always envisaged in all my lectures saying that the Great Wall, the enclosing wall, related to the major phase of construction of the buildings that I've spoken about earlier. But if this is contemporary with Structure 5, then I think it throws out a whole load of new questions about the early Neolithic in Orkney. So this year we'll be extending this trench just a little bit. Obviously we won't, but we always do. And that will hopefully uncover the full circuit of this building. And I think that we've found some round-based ceramics in the main trench, right at the bottom of the sequence. And I think here we'll find equal amounts or more of those kind of round-based early carinated bowls. But as I said, this great wall, surrounding wall here, so beautifully portrayed by National Geographic. Well, they might have to change all of that now. But one of the things that we thought was that, yes, as I said, this wall relates to all these later structures, Structure 1, Structure 14, Structure 10, 12, etc., etc. But it doesn't really matter. Whichever phase it relates to, we will be now be able to integrate that information into the overall sequence. But it's always been a bit of a mystery because we had the wall on the north side, we had the wall on the south side, but these conjoining walls were always just pure conjecture. Wishful thinking, really. Here we have curves at the end of both this wall and this wall. We're kind of joining the dots up. And although I think that the wall on this side was probably removed when the road was constructed, we were always a bit baffled that we hadn't picked the wall up on this side. It didn't show up in the geophysics because, one, there's a fence line along here that interfered with the geophysics results, but also there's overhead power lines as well that would have interfered with the geophysics. But then just last year, one of the supervisors, who will remain nameless after a rather heavy night in the pub, the next day he was looking at some photographs of the Ness. And in the best tradition of archaeological discoveries done with a massive hangover, he noticed this particular photograph. And there, just along the edge in the kind of rougher ground leading down to the shore of the Loch Ness, he noticed a very faint, almost crop mark. You can just about make it out there, kind of change in vegetation. Well, he rushed over and we went out there, and this crop mark coincides with quite a dramatic drop-off, something that we'd noticed before, but the coincidence of this crop mark to this change in slope. So now what it looks like is that we do probably have the wall running along the shore of the Loch Ness. But to prove that, we'll just have to open another little trench. Trench Y. I hope by the end of this season I won't be saying why, but Trench Y. And this will hopefully pick up the remnants of the wall as it swings round along the shore. It might not be there. It could be, as we've discovered in other places where we thought the wall was, it was shown in the geophysics, but it appears to have been robbed out in places, as with many of the buildings at the Ness. The stone has been removed. But anyway, we've got high hopes, so watch this space, and hopefully Trench Y will deliver the goods. So anyway, on to the main bit of the lecture, Ness of Brodgar to a T. Well, I'm sure many of you will be aware that the T refers to Trench T. This kind of enigmatic little hole in the ground, which started off as just a very small trench, but like so many of the trenches of the Ness, there's always more questions, so we always have to expand just a little bit. But the reason we positioned the trench there, towards the tip of the Brodgar Peninsula, was a result of the geophysics. This was the original geophysics, and here you can see the northern enclosing wall, the southern enclosing wall here that we think is going to join up around there. But here, beyond the walled enclosure, you can see this series of concentric anomalies. And I must admit, for many years, those concentric anomalies I interpreted as being the remnants of a chambered tomb. A chambered tomb, a bit like Maze Howe or Quantiness or Coyness on Sandy, where again you can see these kind of concentric anomalies, concentric revetments built within the mounds of these chambered tombs. So, and yeah, as a chambered tomb, it wouldn't have surprised us really, because here, in some very early depictions of Vanessa Brodgar, we can still see that there's a massive mound, which isn't quite so evident now. But here, in a sketch done in 1772, and again in 19th century illustrations, you can see that the mound of the Ness of Brodgar is much, much more prominent. So why shouldn't it contain a chambered tomb? Another Maze Howe. Well, right into the late 19th century, we still see this monumental mound. I thought it was a bit of artistic license to begin with, but I think it goes beyond that, or thought it went beyond that. And even into the 1920s, we can still see the mound here at the Ness. Not quite so prominent, but still there, slightly bigger than we see it today. But it's when you go back to maps, the late 18th, early 19th century, that mound really takes on a life of its own. Because here you can see 1772, it's like a giant pimple at the tip of the Brodgar Peninsula. And the same even back in 1850, very kind of prominent mound the way it's depicted on these early maps. And even on some of the earliest OS maps, 1881, you can still see indications by the lines of the field here that this mound extended into the field. It was still left as rough ground, probably because of the contours of it, wasn't suitable for ploughing. But that all changed. In the late 1880s, it's recorded that this mound was levelled. And by 1902, you can see that the field has been squared off, and that mound has basically become part of the surrounding field. Great pity. But it was during that levelling of the mound, back in 1880, that this carved stone ball was recorded, supposedly coming from that mound, along with this stone slab. Well, if you read any book about the Ness of Brodgar in the past, or looked at Canmore or any other reference to it, they were attributed to that mound. But then Hugo Anderson Weimark, he was doing some research a couple of years ago, and in fact he found the original records relating to these, and in fact they come from a different mound over behind the stones of Stenness. But still, we lived in hope. But this mound, which we thought was just, a lump in the landscape, I think even was made more prominent because it's one of the few mounds in that landscape that has a name. The name of Cocknacumming. I'm sure that many Acadians here will be quivering in their seats with my pronunciation, but please correct me at a later date. Cocknacumming. And this mound, if you have a look at Canmore, it was supposedly completely removed. A mound of big burnt stones. But what I think is they got it wrong. But in fact, judging by what we've discovered with our excavations in Trench D, in fact, Cocknacumming is still extant, to a certain extent. Slightly less prominent, but it's still there. And this interpretation of the name Cocknacumming is, thank you to Zigid, who's up the back somewhere, potentially means something like the mound of the enclosure, which may or may not have direct relevance to the original use of this mound. But anyway, just to have a mound with a name is quite unusual. So what did we do? We had to open a little trench. And when we first opened it, we did start to see what appeared to be the remnants of these concentric anomalies that the geophysics had showed up. And this became clearer as we gradually cleaned down. We seemed to have quite an obvious break in the stonework there, another break running there. But you can just start to make out a darker patch here. And this got us a bit worried because it was a pit that had been dug into the mound. And within this, we started to find metalwork, pieces of iron. And I must admit, as a Neolithicist, I got slightly perturbed. I'm sure Martin would have been jumping up and down, but yes, rang alarm bells. But there we have it, a big pit that had been dug into it, producing Iron Age material. And also a kind of small crescent-shaped setting of stones. And it just didn't seem to shout, this is Neolithic in date at all. But then we realised what it was. It was Iron Age in date. And in fact, this body of stone that was showing up in the geophysics was in fact the remains of an Iron Age ditch. They got everywhere, and they desecrated many Neolithic sites. But that's another story. But this is a huge revetted ditch that had been dug round the remnants of this mound. And there we can see it, an early aerial view of it from the excavations. And you can see in our trench, you've got one edge there, the other edge there. So it's basically a rubble-filled ditch that has been constructed around this mound. And when we started to excavate it and excavate more of it, we discovered, yes, it was a beautiful ditch. And there we see it has revetted on the downslope, it was revetted on the upslope, and then this ditch has been infilled with all this rubble. And then just last year we realised, in fact, there was also the remnants of a bank on the inside. And underneath that bank, there was burials, or fragments of human bone. And all of this seemed to fit in with the Iron Age. It just was, typical. And the closest kind of parallel I think we have for this ditch is the site of Minehow. Minehow, does everybody know what Minehow is? You might have seen it on the television on Time Team many, many years ago. Minehow is this incredible underground chamber. You enter through the top, there's steps going down, there's a little platform here, further steps going down, and you enter into this deep underground chamber, which is about 4 meters high. Strange and enigmatic. And on excavation, it was shown that this strange chamber was surrounded by a massive ditch, rock cut, or ditch cut into the natural boulder clay. And when it was excavated, it was discovered that here at one of the entrances across the ditch, it was beautifully revetted. Typical Iron Age activity. When you build a ditch, you revet it. Bit of a simplification that, but yes, they did like revetting the ditches. You visit Ness, the famous broch up at the north end of mainland Orkney, and there you'll see the beautiful revetments within the ditch. So there we have Iron Age activity on this mound. So initially all my expectations of a nice chambered tomb were thrown out, baby with the bathwater. But one of the intriguing things about this Iron Age ditch was it still seemed to be extant or visible in the 19th century, because Henry Dryden, famous architect, along with George Petrie, who was a local, quite famous antiquarian, quite advanced for his day, they drew this measured sketch plan of the area. And here we have the two standing stones that still sit up proud in the front garden of Lockview, but here they show the mound. And it's not just a kind of average detail, kind of guesstimate, because when you overlay that on our geophysics, it matches exactly. So was that rubble-filled ditch still extant and visible in the 19th century? I think it was. But when the mound was levelled, they took away the upper fills of that ditch. They took away the top of the mound. And so that's what we're left with. So anyway, Iron Age, let's move on. So that's the position of our little trench T, which, as I said, initially we wanted to investigate those concentric anomalies. But it was what that Iron Age ditch had been dug into. It was what underlay it. Because the rest of the mound seemed to be a massive mound of midden, rubbish, trash. A monumental mound of rubbish, midden, trash. And everything about it just seemed to scream Neolithic, and it was. But there were still hints that maybe my wish of a chambered tomb within that mound was going to be realised, because just after we started digging at the top of the mound, this big crack appeared. And one side of it, over the first week of excavation, dropped by about 3 or 4 inches compared to the other side. So I thought, here we have it. This is evidence for maybe a structure underneath the mound. So we brought in, yes, we nicknamed it the Crack of Doom. Good Indiana Jones. So we brought in Professor Scott Pike with his auger, and Scott struggled and strained for quite a long time because he just kept on going down. And in fact, what Scott recorded was that there was midden down to a depth of at least 4 meters. No signs of structural archaeology at all. And it wasn't just midden, it was very, very finely laminated layers. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of different events. And there you can see what midden sometimes looks like, these very, very fine bands of ash that dumps material, perhaps after a single fire, that this material is taken out and added to this huge mound. But to actually extract the maximum amount of detail from this, we have to bring in yet more science. And one of the best people for that in her field is Dr. Lisa Shillito from Newcastle University. And Lisa is a microarchaeologist or micromorphologist. And what she does is amazing. Because micromorphology, if you come to our site, you might notice on many of the sides of our trenches these kind of square holes. Well, these aren't square rabbit holes. These are the results of Lisa and also Dr. Joe Mackenzie taking the samples from these deposits. And what they do is they bang little tins, little square tins, into the midden. They then extract it. You're left with this hole. But then the samples that they gather, they then dry, then impregnate with resin, and then they can slice it ultra thin, and then they can look at these under the microscope. And what you might see with the human eye in, say, a section like that, you might be able to differentiate maybe 10, 20 different events. Through the microscope, you'll be able to differentiate dozens, sometimes hundreds of different events. And it's not just being used in the middens, it's also being used in the floors of some of the structures, well, in fact, all the structures. And some of them, I think, are quite a kind of work of modern art. I could quite imagine having that in my living room wall, but, well, maybe not. But it's beautiful, and what this shows is a whole sequence of different events, but also it holds a record of a whole range of different activities taking place, both in the midden and in the houses. And we can start to pick out organic material, the ashy debris, fragments of pottery, bone, ceramics. And by adding all that evidence together, you can start to pick out other things when you kind of combine that micromorphology with phytolith analysis and a whole range of other geochemical techniques. So you can start to pick up stuff, say for instance, in our midden deposits, certain things, because of the acidic soil conditions, aren't well represented. But by analysis using all these different techniques, you can start to piece together a picture of what has maybe disappeared. You're left with this kind of very clever chemical signature. So for instance, before I go on, I better tell you what a phytolith is. A phytolith, there we go, won't read it out for you, but it's a silica body that forms inside organic material. And this is a very kind of hard substance, so it survives in even very acidic soils. But each one of those phytoliths can give you an idea of the different types of plants and material that were used. So a whole range of different types of work can be, or results can be extracted from this range of micromorphology, phytolith analysis, etc. So you can end up looking at all the different types of fuels and evidence for the environment, economy, etc., etc. But there's also some of the more regular things you'll find in midden. Lots of big bone spreads, not very well preserved. A lot of it has a consistency of Acadian fudge cake, very difficult to excavate. But by careful recording of it, you can still classify what some of these bigger bone fragments are. And we're lucky enough with having Dr. Ingrid Mainland on site that, for instance, within all this lot, we found one horn core which came from an exceptionally large beast, an exceptionally large cow or bull. And it has every aspect of it seems to say this was an auric. We haven't had it DNA tested as they have with some of the ones on Westray from Links and Oatland, but just the scale of this horn core says this was not your average domestic cow. So like everything else at the Ness, it's on that kind of Texans scale. But you start to look at the scale of this midden mound and all the items that are found within it. And what does it represent? Well, the simple answer is it represents conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption is something that, really, I think most people would think of in terms of the 20th, 21st century. But back at the Ness, they were conducting conspicuous consumption on a grand scale. And this is evidenced by, for instance, the amount of material that's gone into this rubbish heap, but also, for instance, the sizes of pots that we're finding at the Ness. Although we do find bigger ones, in the actual houses, or these kind of buildings, don't call them houses, we find that there's an emphasis on the kind of smaller, more delicate pots and the medium-sized pots. These were pots that weren't being used for processing food material. These were pots that were being used for cooking and the consumption of foodstuffs rather than preparation. And this is borne out by all the evidence from the carbonised material, where we have no evidence for processing of grain on the site. You go to Skara Brae or many of the other domestic sites, but not a hint of it. But also the whole bone assemblage that we've looked at, it all seems to be, or mainly cattle. And it's not just a cattle bone, but it's also by studying the residues and the pottery. The dominant evidence is from bovine and dairy residues. So these aren't kind of your everyday eating animals. These are there for special occasions, so probably representing feasting. So here we have this mound, which is this kind of statement. It's a reflection of the status and affluence of the Ness, which would be good enough in itself. But then my wish for an unusual structure under this mound started to come true. Because at the end of the 2015 season, we started to see some structural elements poking up through this mound. And it first appeared as this one upright stone. But by the following season, we started to have a whole family of structural remains. There's upright slabs, potential lines of walls, a bit of a drain. You get drains everywhere in the Neolithic. But it wasn't until the following year when all these different elements started to slot into place. And what it showed was something amazing. We knew that what we had in the main trench P with structure 10, structure 12, all the others was amazing. But in some ways, this was on a different type of scale, magnitude. Because you have a building which has a particular type of construction method that's not really been seen anywhere else. And it was the realization when you started to join some of the dots, or so we thought we had to join the dots. But for instance, these different bits of upright slab, we realized were in fact the remains of a single stone slab. This is over 4 meters long, on edge, been set into the ground. But it's not just the one slab like that. It's lots of them, really cladding the inside of this building. Or not really cladding, because what these massive slabs were doing was they were helping to support upright orthostatic cladding. So you would have had something that looked like this. Truly spectacular. These massive slabs are forming almost like Neolithic skirting boards, supporting these upright slabs here, wall core, outer wall face behind it, and in the interior. So it is a bit different, but it's also big. It's 7.5 meters across internally. And this kind of schematic plan of it, it's over 17 meters long. Well, we don't know how long it is yet because it disappears out the edge of the trench. But the way how these recumbent massive slabs have been utilised right away around the inside of this building, and then these other orthostats, upright stones, being used to clad the inside, but also create kind of divisional uprights. But it's not just the inside of this building that's pretty damn spectacular, but also the external. Like so many of the buildings at the Ness, it suffered hugely from robbing, collapse, maybe deliberate demolition. But the external wall face, this stone here, which forms the cornerstone, has been very carefully pecked into shape. The edge, the corner there, you're left with not just a right angle, but a kind of very slightly splayed angle. And the outside face as well, it's not just vertical, but it seems to have been deliberately inclined inwards. Very slight angle, but very deliberate. And underneath that, you have step foundations that would have, the outside wall would have sat upon. And then beyond that, a drain, another one of these drains, typical Neolithic drains, but also here, evidence that this we had paved over, more like the kind of paving and drainage that you'll see around Structure 10. But, like the other buildings at the Ness, it also seemed to have been roofed. We're finding evidence in the middle of this collapsed structure for Neolithic roof tiles. Maybe not in the scale of what we found in Structure 8, where there was almost a complete collapsed roof, but just individual slabs. But, like the other buildings, it came to an end. And I think it was robbed out, it was deliberately demolished, and what we see is the shell of a building that's basically becoming silted up with natural clays, maybe over many generations. Or so we thought until last year, when we had one of those torrential downpours, and we saw one of our trenches have about 2 to 3 inches of silt deposited in about 2 hours at the bottom of it. So maybe this was just a couple of weeks of good old Acadian rain. But initially we thought that this was like the tomb of Buchan, which is only just on the hillside above the ring of Brodgar. And this was originally excavated back in 1861, but it did seem to show similar usage of orthostats and but also the way that it had been demolished. Because back in 2002, I had the chance to re-excavate this, and it was a very neat little story we managed to extract from this very badly damaged tomb, not only damaged in prehistory, but also kind of ravaged by the antiquarians of the 19th century. But we showed that this tomb, like the one, or the structure we have down at the Ness, had been deliberately demolished and robbed. But the idea of a tomb, I don't think quite fits with what we're finding in this structure, Structure 27. And it's only been in the last few weeks looking at some of the great timber halls, the early Neolithic timber halls that we find in mainland Scotland. They've only been recognised over the last 30, 40 years. They were always thought to be medieval, Dark Age timber halls. But ones like Balbrigdy and Cleish and Warrenfield and the Lockerbie one, these are massive Neolithic buildings, halls. And they're not a kind of late development in the Neolithic. These seem to come from the very earliest Neolithic activity that we find in Scotland. And some of them are on a scale which would put some of the Ness structures to shame. They are massive. But unlike, obviously, the structures we've discovered at the Ness, all stone-built, these just show up as a series of post holes. But this jury, like everything in archaeology, is still out, because it can't be decided whether, in fact, these were roof structures, whether they were unroofed, whether they were cult houses, very large communal domestic houses, or what did I say? Can't remember. Domestic cult, domestic ritual, big things. But sorry, having a brainstorm. So the jury's still out. But I think, the essence of these buildings is perhaps what we're seeing in this structure 27 that we see at the Ness underneath that massive midden mound. So there you have this kind of amazing midden mound at the end of the Ness, but it's not the end of the story. After they've built the midden mound, after they've constructed it, after they've covered up this enigmatic structure 27, they then come back and really try to play games with the archaeologist's head, because cut into this midden mound is a series of pits. Over 60 pits in our little trench have been identified. And they all seem to have this kind of very clear-cut edge, which seems to mean that they were quickly dug and then they were quickly backfilled. And there's been lots of debate on site about why they did this. Was it some Neolithic job creation scheme? I don't think so. But we find pits of every size and description, some of them just purely pits, other ones with bits of walling in them, some of them partially lined, every style of them, ranging from about a couple of feet in diameter right the way up to 6, 7, 8 feet in diameter. And some of them, I think, are a result of that kind of later robbing, taking the stone away from that structure 27. But I think there's a whole range of other functions for these, including possibly even the storage of grain, which may be dating to the Iron Age, where they were digging into this, where the ash would have had a kind of quite a special preservative quality. But anyway, the jury's out, and this year we'll be digging yet more of these pits, joy, and we're looking at employing some new types of techniques to try and disentangle what these pits were like. So if you come to the Ness and you gaze at structure Trench T, you must imagine flying over Trench T. And yes, you'll see the wonders of it, but the best thing to do is to come and see it for yourselves. And you will be amazed at the scale of these massive slabs that have been incorporated into structure 27. And hopefully by the time you all come and visit, there'll be more of them exposed. But anyway, I'd like to reiterate my thanks as ever to a whole range of different supporters for the Ness. Over the years, everybody. But they've also helped put money into the Ness of Brodgar Trust and the American Friends of the Ness of Brodgar, which we're eternally grateful for. But it's always worth remembering, I think some people think that we get millions of pounds from the central government or lots of money from the OIC or whatever, but most of the money comes from your good selves. Just now we're happy to take checks, you name it, Visa cards, American Express, you name it. But our funding comes mainly from you. We are in the process of applying from other grants, but the Ness does cost. To keep this excavation running and for you all to enjoy and other people to enjoy, we need your support. So just now we are running a crowdfunder, which you can access through our website. And this is to raise £25,000. Might seem a lot of money, but that is only about 10% of our annual budget, despite the fact that 90% of the people on site are students, volunteers, etc. And it's not that any archaeologist get paid huge sums of money. Archaeology is always renowned as you do it for the love of it, not because of the remuneration. But all of this, a big excavation where you have up to 100 people on site, it does cost. And all of that post-excavation, all that analysis costs even more. But anyway, please consider helping us. Or why not buy a copy of our lovely guidebook? Copies are available as you pop out. Or the current archaeology, the new article in that. But we're also happy this evening to announce the launch of a new book on the Ness of Brodgar. This is a beautiful photographic documentary of the Ness from last year by Woody Musgrove, who's worked in the Ness for many years, but as well as being a very brilliant, talented archaeologist, Woody is also a professional photographer. And he's taken this wonderful book of black and white photographs, often very kind of candid photographs of the team, all those moments which aren't usually recorded in the archaeological record. And for £20, it's an absolute snip. But we'd also like to thank, or OES would like to thank, all the people who have generously donated all the raffle gifts and prizes, as per usual, including the Ness of Brodgar Trust. Can't think what. But also, anybody who's up here for any amount of time over the summer, please consider coming along to help us. Not necessarily, digging if your knees aren't up to it, your back's not up to it, but you want to kind of just be part of the excavation. Each year, well, last year we had over 20,000 visitors to the site, and we expect that to be even surpassed this year. But we need people to meet and greet all those visitors. So if you're kind of feeling a bit sociable, and we meet lots and lots of different people from every corner of the globe, so please come along, volunteer, get in touch, email shop@orkneyarchaeologysociety.co.uk, or see Christine. Where's Christine? Christine, there in the middle, or you'll catch one of the OAS committee members at the shop as you go out. So please put your name down, come and have fun, enjoy the Ness. But anyway, last slide, promise you. And this is just an inkling to show that the Ness is an ongoing story, because this is the farmhouse just to the north of the main site. And this was the front lawn of that house. And it happened to be the last missing piece of the jigsaw of the overall geophysics that we'd conducted all the way from up beyond the Ring of Brodgar, right the way down the Brodgar Peninsula. It's what initially showed up the Ness of Brodgar, and we've now conducted it all the way out to beyond Maysow. But that front lawn was just dying, crying out to be geophysed. So what did we do? We geophysed last year, and there within it, we think there is another massive Neolithic structure. So maybe not me, or maybe not the next generation of archaeologists, but it just goes to show in every square inch of Orkney there's something waiting to be discovered. Thank you.